All right. And then Audacity in 3, 2, 1. All right. Welcome back to the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. And today we have a very special guest for a super interesting topic today. And I am just like strapping in and I'm ready to learn. So today we have Austin Stout with us. And I would love for you to just kind of introduce yourself and your background to our audience and kind of we're going to be talking about weight loss drugs and the pharmaceutical industry a little bit today. So, I mean, maybe just a little intro to you and then what got you into, I know you're very well versed in a lot of different like pharmaceuticals, lab work, like all that sort of thing. But what got
Yeah.
you into that rabbit hole?
Okay. So so I started in the fitness space at a lot different time than we're in now. This was pre-Instagram. So I'm dating this a little bit. So I think I started as a competitive bodybuilder. I was an athlete, I was an avid wrestler. So of course, like that's a weight restricted sport, right? So there's I felt that there was probably a better way to go about the weight restriction and the fitness level than what we were doing at the time. So it just so happened that a lot of the information that I was consuming was coming from bodybuilding, publications, right? So that's why I started gravitating towards that. And of course, at that time we were pretty limited: magazines, forums. I know a lot of the listeners have probably never seen a forum, but if you have, you know what I'm talking about. And I kind of fast forward from that. I had competed early on, especially I still compete now, but early on competing, going through those processes and learning, and I really started to see that there was large health implications, right, with a lot of the stuff that we're doing, right? So especially even just weight loss, like extreme, the extremes that we're going to, fat loss, et cetera. And I ran into some of my own health issues in terms of hormones and, gastrointestinal issues and all this stuff over the years. And that's where I really got interested in the space of functional health, as we call it now. Then we didn't really have a name for it. It was just like, all
Yeah.
right, there's probably something to this and we need to figure this out, right?
Yeah.
And so I started to learn how to read blood work, and I was very fortunate to have a very, very good doctor who I still work with, one of the few, because
Mm.
um, most people know that dealing with the medical community and getting much help there can be difficult. So I was very fortunate in that sense, and he introduced me to a lot of these concepts, and I did a lot of research on my own, made a lot of mistakes, of course. And within my own client base, I had started seeing a lot of these patterns, right? Like why is when I reduce calories, why does this not work? Really basic stuff that on paper, mathematically, it should work, right? And so over time, I started to get even deeper into that space and learned about a lot of specialized testing that we use now, like Dutch tests and GI maps and doing all that, all this stuff. And this was before really many people were talking about it. So of course, I I was younger and got a lot of kind of flack for it, because like, who's this kid and why does he have these ideas and these aren't real, or
Yeah.
whatever, right? So eventually they became more accepted. Um, and in probably 2017, right around the end of 2017, I started kind of educating more people within my own, what I call my mentorship program now, right? So then it had just started as me posting all kinds of stuff, just me posting free information every single day for years and years and years on end. And then eventually people were like, I want you to teach me how to do these things. And so that evolved. I never knew it was going to actually be part of my business model, but now, 50% of I would say probably 30 to 40% of my business model is just educational services, whether it be mentorship or classes or consultation, stuff like that. And then of course the rest of it is my actual coaching, my personal clients. And yeah, so that brings us up to current day.
Yeah. I love it. And born out of necessity is always, I feel like, the common
Yeah,
thread amongst a lot of the veterans that we interview in the industry on this stuff is like, I didn't really plan to get here. It's just like I saw a gap in the industry. I was doing what I
right.
was doing, and here we are. And it's really
Something
cool
like that. Yep.
when it happens that way, right? Because I feel like it's truly organic. You didn't go into it saying like, I'm going to make a lot of money by doing this functional health thing, which I feel like that happens more often nowadays.
Sure.
And you actually were just like, I just really need to figure out how to help people, and the normal way of doing it isn't working. So I love
Yep.
that.
Yeah, you summed it up in fewer words.
It's all good. It's all good. But yeah, I'm super curious to know more about weight loss drugs in particular. And so, context for listeners, I was referred to Austin when I was looking for somebody to interview on this topic, because it's just, I feel like maybe it's not a new thing. Like, they've been around for a while. I know that, but I feel like they've recently been repopularized. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I've heard a lot about Ozempic lately, about Phentermine lately, and it started to show up more and more and more in client cases where they've either taken it before working with us, or have been taking it and wanted to pursue a more holistic program. And the small number of experiences that I've had with clients who were on Phentermine in the past before working with us was they responded very differently to normal protocols after that. And so I'm just super curious. So I would love to know just kind of the lowdown, and we can just start going down the rabbit hole if you don't mind.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we'll start with a little bit of a history. We can do like a history lesson, where
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
this
Some
kind of started.
context.
And I'm not a historian on weight loss drugs. So that's disclaimer first and foremost. I don't have the exact dates in terms of, when these things came about, but
Totally fine.
you had mentioned a lot of things being around for periods of time. And that's true because weight loss drugs have been around for, a century or more, and there's been a lot of different classes of drugs. It just so happens that the ones that are more popular now are these kind of specific classes that you talked about. But we've had other weight loss drugs, earlier in history. Like, some of the listeners are probably familiar with DNP, which is an uncoupler, which is a fat loss drug that's actually was around like in the 20s, I believe, even.
Wow.
And it had a lot of side effects because it raises your body temperature as one of the side effects, and has a very long half-life. So people would die from it because they would cook themselves, right?
Oh my gosh.
Now, that drug is still around. It is still used in the bodybuilding community. Not a lot, but it's definitely still used. Now, granted, people know a lot more about dosing and how to use it differently. But so my point there is that these drugs have been around for a long time. And like the classes that you had talked about, Ozempic or semaglutide, we're talking about GLP-1 agonists, which, if I'm not mistaken, were originally intended for diabetics. Okay,
I think so.
so
Yeah.
we'll start with that one because that is the one right now. Like, that's the drug right now for sure, is that drug class of GLP-1s. And it was originally intended for diabetics because by one of the mechanisms is that it actually increases the secretion of insulin, right? So by virtue of that, it's going to control blood sugar better. So it essentially works independently of glucose, which is interesting because generally with the way that insulin works is we have glucose in the blood, and then of course our body is like, hey, we need insulin to shuttle this glucose to the different tissues in the body, right? And we found that there are drugs and medications that will actually stimulate insulin release without having glucose present, right? So traditionally they would give diabetics insulin to control their blood sugar, but they found that GLP-1s would actually help the body stimulate the production of its own insulin better, right? And there's one of the problems with diabetes, like specifically, so type 1 diabetes, you don't produce insulin, like you have to be on insulin, right? That's a different disease than type 2 diabetes, which is the one that's really what we are plagued with in modern society, because it's really more of a lifestyle disease, right? Our overweight, our diets, our lifestyles, all that stuff, right? So our pancreases don't function very well. They're kind of like beat up and worn down, and the beta cells in the pancreas are not working the way that they should be. But we found that these drugs, specifically this drug, would help assist that pancreas to secrete insulin. So the GLP-1s it's not actually a GLP-1. What it is an agonist, which means that it acts on the receptor of GLP-1. So it stimulates the production of insulin. Now, that's not really what we use it for in the fitness community. It's obviously could be beneficial to control your blood glucose, but really the kind of the appeal, I guess, the appeal of it in the fitness industry is more so that it kills your appetite, right? Now, the reason that it kills your appetite is because it also slows down motility of your GI tract. So it's basically going to make you feel full, even though you haven't really eaten enough calories to feel full, which on paper sounds like a dream, right? You're like, oh, cool. Like, I don't have to eat that much, and I'm still going to feel full. So of course that's going to eliminate a lot of the issues with dieting, which is what? Adherence, really. Just not being able to stick to, I would say, especially for general population, is just not even being able to stick to a diet because of hunger, right? And then we binge, and then we diet, and we binge, and we diet, and then we have this yo-yo, and then we have all these issues down the line, right? That's historically what we've dealt with, especially in, I wouldn't even say just general population. I would say that it also happens in the bodybuilding industry, in that every time someone goes through this cycle of like contest prep and then comes out, they almost get worse every time going into the next contest prep, right? If they're not taking enough time in between and restoring all the functions. And in Gen Pop, we see this all the time, because people diet and they yo-yo, and what happens? They get fatter every time. Every time they go to start dieting again, they're fatter every time, right? They weigh more every time. So over the years, they're losing weight in stents, but there's zero retention. So if we look at the statistics on weight loss, they're not that bad, but the statistics on weight loss retention are really awful. They're dismal, they're horrible. So with drugs like this, anyhow, kind of moving back into that, it's going to slow the motility down. So essentially what it's doing is almost making you feel like you don't want food, because you'll get nauseous if you try to consume food. And of course, this is dose dependent. So generally how this drug is used is it'll start at a low dose, and they'll titrate it up. That's in the medical community. That's a lot of time how they'll do it, right? They'll start low, they'll titrate up. And what you see is a lot of people will tolerate it at the lower doses. They'll have some benefit from it, and they continue to titrate up until eventually people are literally getting sick, throwing up, feeling nauseous. They're having all these side effects because it's slowing the motility down so much that they're vomiting up their food. Other downsides to that obviously would be it's still caloric restriction. So of course, over time, if it's inducing extreme caloric restriction, then in the background, it's still going to create a lot of those hormonal and metabolic adaptations that we don't want, right? So it's kind of, I guess you could say it's kind of solving one problem, but it's still creating all of the other problems that we don't want. So
it's setting someone up for just complete failure once they come off the drug, and their metabolism is so downregulated, and then they're in a worse spot. Even, I would argue, probably even worse than if they had just tried a normal diet on their own, probably because their calories are even lower than they have been.
100%. And I want to caveat this with saying, I'm not necessarily going to say that no one would benefit from it, because if you were very obese and you had a lot of adipose tissue, you could probably go calorically restrict yourself for a long time, and you have so much stored energy that you probably will be okay for a while, right? Like there's been studies on this. There was, I can't remember what the time was, but, and some people may have know of this study, but there was a man that had not eaten, he didn't eat any food. And it was ridiculous. It was like over a year or something. It was an obscene amount of time. And he was very overweight. All they did was basically give him water and micronutrients so he didn't have like vitamin and mineral deficiencies, right? And he lost some obviously like massive amount of weight, but he'd also weighed like 400 or 500 pounds when he started, right?
Yeah.
Now we're applying it to, of course, like it's being applied to people that are probably clinically obese, but it's also being applied a lot to people that are just trying to get off that 20 pounds that they've just been trying to get off for the last decade, you know?
Yeah.
So
do you know the process for that? Like what it looks like when you go to the doctor, and let's say I'm one of those people who I have 20, 30 pounds to lose. And I'm like, I've been a yo-yo dieter. I've been doing the thing where I get fatter and fatter every time I basically get off the diet. Is there like a checklist that like they're looking to, like, is it like a self-selection sort of thing, or how is that given out?
So this is another one of the problems, and that's a great question, because this is where we're running into the issues in that where it's being prescribed and how it's being prescribed. So now we have so many HRT clinics and weight loss clinics and all these things coming about, which are very beneficial because now we have more availability of things like hormone replacement that people need that were having difficulty getting before.
Yeah.
But there's money to be made, right? Yeah. So semaglutide is a very expensive drug. Okay, so of course there's dollar signs here. So like you guys can, everyone can kind of put two and two together there. So the selection process is just from what I've seen, and of course I'm not working in a clinic, so I'm just giving you anecdotal evidence, but there's not really a selection process. So that's part of the problem, is that it's like, hey, I need to lose weight. I've not been able to lose weight, whatever. And here you go, and now it's even to the point where there's a lot of these, what you may call like these boutique clinics that are doing cosmetic stuff. They're doing, lip filler and all this stuff for females. And they have NPs, like nurse practitioners or prescribers within the offices. And they're just giving this stuff out, because they can prescribe it, right? Because it is a prescribable drug and they have the authority to prescribe it. Now that doesn't mean that it's, and of course, for a lot of people, they're like, I'm prescribed it. It's a prescription. So it's, it's fine, and usually what happens is they do see benefit initially, right? I mean, because of course their appetite goes down, they lose weight. So on paper, it looks really nice for a while, and then as that dose goes up, or they try to come off, or they run into issues or whatever it might be, now we have a real problem. And I think that it's been being used enough for weight loss that we are starting to see the residual effects of it. And it's going to get worse. So I'm calling it now. You heard it here, is we're going to have some epic rebounds are coming.
Yeah. I heard recently, actually, what my head coach today contacted me, and she was like, hey, did you hear about the Ozempic lawsuit? And I was like, what? And apparently somebody, I think, had died from the like slowed gut motility that it actually backed them up so much that they passed away. Yeah,
it's wild. So I did hear about that recently, and I've also seen a little bit more evidence in terms of like what it's actually doing to your body composition. So people are losing massive amounts of muscle tissue when they use it too. Yeah. So cosmetically, it's not really doing what you want it to do anyhow. Again, if you applied it to a very obese person, there's probably some merit in that for a period of time, but it's just a small context by which you can apply it, and it's not really being used for those purposes. And also, and again, this is not my field of expertise, but from my understanding, that a lot of the diabetics are having a hard time getting it now, because supplies are being used up on people that are probably really don't need it or shouldn't be using it. So we're running into a lot of issues right now.
Well, I think because like, oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, it's just been interesting. Marissa and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. It's been interesting watching how the news has portrayed it. And so it was kind of like, oh, this hot new thing, all the celebrities are using it. And like, that's how they're staying thin. And it was like a big thing with the Real Housewives. And then as more and more people have been on it, it's been like, oh, what are the side effects of Ozempic? And it's like, what is Ozempic butt? What is Ozempic face? And kind of like what you're saying, it's like they're literally almost like melting away, like because like you were saying, they're losing their muscle mass, like they're almost losing weight like too quickly in a sense. And so it's been interesting to kind of see that swing from the other side.
And of course, we can pretty much assume that most people outside of the fitness space, even probably a lot of people in the fitness space, they probably aren't being diligent enough with supporting their nutrition, and they're creating all these micronutrient deficiencies and all these other things. And that's not even talking about, your thyroid and your sex hormones and all that. It's just literally not getting enough vitamins and minerals because you're not absorbing food and you haven't gone to the bathroom in 3 days. And, like, what are we doing here? Right.
Yeah.
So,
and something else you said, like how you said that the diabetics are actually having trouble getting the drug now because the supply is low. I feel like something that it just made me think of was like how ultimately like severe obesity, there is a socioeconomic component to it as well, right? It's like the highest rates of obesity are in the lower socioeconomic statuses. And Ozempic, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard from someone that it's like $1,000 a month for that without insurance. And I don't know how insurance plays a role, but it's like, it's almost like the people that can pay for it are also the people that shouldn't be using it in the first place and are eating all of it up. And then the people that may actually benefit from it, like you said, are not even able to get their hands on it for that reason.
Right. People that need it for a disease.
Yeah.
Right. You get obesity. Obesity is a disease in the sense that it creates diseses, but it's of course more lifestyle related and diabetes again is lifestyle related as well. So you could argue that most cases of type 2 diabetes you can reverse through, lifestyle, but that's not really, obviously that's not really the point of the discussion. But so shortages and side effects, people dying and people, melting away and losing all their muscle and we're like on the tip of the iceberg. I could probably predict what it's going to look like in 2 years from now, because of in my business, I work with a lot of functional health cases. It's not all of my business, but I do work with a lot of them. And I can only imagine what I'm going to get coming, what I'm going to have coming through the door in another couple years.
Can we get your hot take? Scary. Can we get your 2-year prediction?
Well, it's going to be the same. It's just going to be the same stuff. It's just going to be worse. Right. Yeah. It's going to be the same type of stuff that we're currently dealing with. It's just going to be worse. So, most of the issues that we're dealing with now, I deal with a lot of gastrointestinal issues. Probably 90% of the cases have some type of GI issue, but from a hormone perspective, which of course this could make that worse potentially, right? But from a hormone perspective, I'm getting women in their 20s that have menopausal hormone profiles. They're crashed out to 0 and they're 23 years old. So I just don't know how we're going to possibly benefit from this.
Yeah. Oh man, I had another question, but I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. But this is it's so interesting how the marketing and the fad of it all plays into it. Of like, again, there's just a quick fix mentality that people are really drawn towards. So since I can't remember my next question, let's talk about phentermine.
Okay. Yeah. So a different class of medication, right? Because really in traditionally, because Phentermine, and again, I don't know exactly the dates and times and things, but Phentermine, I would venture to say, has probably been used for weight loss longer than GLP-1s. I could totally be wrong on that, but it's a stimulant. So like this class of drugs has been around for long periods of time, and we know why stimulants induce weight loss, because you're not hungry. Like if you've ever, a great example is, you ever seen someone that's addicted to amphetamines, they generally aren't overweight, right? I don't know how many meth addicts are obese. I don't know any meth addicts personally, but I'm assuming that most of them probably are not overweight. So it works very similarly to amphetamine. So it's going to reduce release catecholamine. So we're talking like dopamine, epinephrine, adrenaline, and it's going to lower your appetite. So the mechanism of phentermine is pretty simple, really. And the issues that arise from those classes of drugs are also pretty well known. And it has the potential to cause a lot of similar side effects to any other weight loss drug. But of course, it's going to come with its own kind of nuance too, because with heavy stimulant use, of course, we now are talking about like taxing the nervous system, taxing the adrenal glands, and we're doing this in a society that's already running on fumes all the time anyhow. Right. So, you're downing phentermine, and you're drinking, 2 Bang energy drinks a day and whatever. And, it's not gonna end well. So, but yeah, the class of drug, pretty well known. It is going to be a stimulant. It is similar to amphetamines. It's going to make you not hungry. It's probably going to make you more focused, blah, 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 the whole thing. With those drugs, again, is their application. I could potentially see there being application maybe in like the end of a contest prep or something, if people like absolutely wanted to use it to increase adherence and help with appetite. Like we've been using those types of things forever. We use caffeine, we use that's why people that smoke cigarettes a lot generally are, not all of them are thin, but a lot of them, right? Because lower your appetite, of course, with nicotine use. But application, it's really a terrible way to go about weight loss in general.
Yeah. Well, that's the joke about France, right? It's like, you don't get overweight when you go over to Europe because you just smoke all day. But
right.
So right. Yeah, this is the one that like I've recently had like 2 very similar cases happen almost like back to back with clients, where they basically, in their history form, they were like, well, I've used phentermine in the past. And when that came up on the forum, I literally didn't know what it was at the time. And it was probably like very early on this year. And it's just been a journey of learning a little bit more about this now. And both of these people definitely needed a reverse diet, and to no surprise, because now that I know that phentermine just kills your appetite, if you were on that a couple of months before you signed up with us, it's like you were probably eating 500, 1,000 calories a day tops from that appetite suppression. So they needed that reverse diet. And both people are also very, very stressed out, I would say. So yeah, so I'm seeing some common trends here, but I guess like the result of that was both of those people gained a lot more weight in that reverse diet than they otherwise would have or should have, or we've seen in many other cases. And we were really, really perplexed for a while. Do you think that that's more to do with just like the degree of metabolic adaptation that would have happened from using that drug? Or do you think that there's multiple things pushing that in that direction?
So it's created, the caloric restrictions creating the same adaptations that everyone else is having. It's just their caloric restrictions more extreme. So of course, the adaptations more extreme. And there's also something that I've had this discussion with a couple people, and this is maybe a theory that might be a little out there for some people, but I've speculated that, and this will make sense when I say it. So I've speculated that we also have something called epigenetics coming into play a lot here. And what this is like, think of evolutionary adaptation. So if we look across the board at genetics in general, if we look from societal differences from like region to region, we would see differences in, this region is generally intolerant to these foods because they've had this diet, they've had these dietary practices for certain periods of time, or this region generally is more overweight than this region because of whatever, societal differences. So essentially what I'm seeing is that the adaptations aren't different. It's just that the body epigenetically is getting used to these environments. So these switches, because we all have these switches that turn on and off. And so the switches would essentially tell us, like, we restrict calories. There's certain things that happen. Our conversion of thyroid hormone goes down. Our sex hormones can drop. Our basal metabolic rate can slow down. That happens to you. That happens to me. That happens to all of us. But what we see in our space a lot is that first time somebody diets, they have good success. The second time, it's a little bit harder. The third time, nothing's happening, right? You're like, okay, well, I'm doing the same stuff, but I'm not getting the same response, right? And then eventually we're getting almost no response despite extreme measures that we're taking. And I see this a lot in contest prep. I see this a lot with prepping athletes. If we're not taking sufficient time in between preps, that second prep, that third prep, that fourth prep, or whatever, eventually, we start and it's just like a light switch. Nothing happens. And sometimes that's even when they did reverse diet during the off season and they did bring their calories up and they did all these things. It's just like, did the right stuff, but the adaptations happen so much quicker than they were before. Mm-hmm. And that's because there probably wasn't enough time elapsed between these bouts of deficit to really allow the body to feel safe again, essentially.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're saying, like, let me see if I'm getting this right. You're basically saying the epigenetics was kind of an example to say, like, within one person's like lifespan of dieting, it's like each generation is the cycle of dieting, each cycle of dieting. Sure. And then basically there's like that generational trauma, air quotes, being passed from generation to generation. And that like response is so much quicker as it gets more severe. Is that right?
Right. And
I think, yeah.
And of course, there's a lot of context that goes into that. If you're taking sufficient time off between bouts of dieting, if you're doing all the right things for long enough, you're probably not gonna have those problems. Yeah. Right. But we see this a lot. And that's why in the fitness space, it's pretty well known that you should probably not diet consecutively back to back too often. Like, that's a pretty well-known thing. Everyone's pretty much adopted that. And no one's really arguing that at this point, but why? Right. So I think where it gets kind of gray and murky in the water is when we are reverse dieting and we're looking at blood work and we're seeing, okay, well, your thyroid's restored and your sex hormones are restored and all these things. Then they go to diet again and nothing happens. That's where, based on this theory that these adaptations are happening quicker, it's almost like an instantaneous adaptation where the adaptation's the same, it's just happening right now. Yeah. I take the calories away and the body's like, nope, not doing it, not doing this again, and it just shuts down.
Yeah. Well, I understand that actually from like just a personal standpoint of, so I have a background in bodybuilding as well. I don't really anymore, but about 4 years or so, I was like not back to back. I did 2 shows in 2016, 2 shows in 2018. And ever since then, fat loss phases after that, I've just noticed that like I worked with one coach for a really long time through a lot of that. And we just kind of learned that like, if Marissa's going to do a fat loss phase, we don't do a gradual cut of calories because like the body just kind of adapts real quick. And so like, I've used the term, like my metabolism just adapts quickly to whatever I'm doing. Especially in a deficit context, not because of any real science, but just because of that experience. So I feel like you're just like speaking to exactly that in my own journey.
Yeah. And we see it in most people. Of course, there's the fortunate few that can do it. But I can't even tell you if I took 100 new client intakes, and I mean, that might be one person in those 100 people that is going to be able to do those things consecutively. And we see it so much. I mean, I can even look at the top levels of bodybuilding, especially on the female side. Take the bikini division, for example, like at the highest levels, Olympia levels. Why are there new champions all the time? There's people falling off because their bodies they're not maintaining this because they're professionals and they have to maintain a competition schedule every year, boom, boom, boom. And eventually they just can't anymore. Right. And we know that physiologically females' bodies are already probably going to be more adaptive than a male body anyhow, because you're designed to conceive, so you have your mechanisms built in are a little bit more sensitive in that sense. Right. And so that's why we're going in and nothing's happening. So we were kind of talking about, I know we were kind of talking about weight loss drugs, but that does tie into that discussion in the sense that, of course, I can only assume that these drugs and what the types of diets and things that people are doing with these drugs are going to further exacerbate these issues. And unfortunately, people get to the point where they just give up. They just are like, I'm not ever going to diet ever again. here's what I am, and I'm just going to be overweight forever. And that's that. Or they had aspirations of competing for long periods of time and they stop. And of course, now they hate bodybuilding, and bodybuilding's the worst thing ever, and blame it, and it's bodybuilding's fault and all this. I'm like, well, not really, but there's a little bit more that goes into it. But unfortunately, that's just the landscape, that's how it is.
I didn't even think about that mentality for someone who struggled with weight loss for a while to then get prescribed something that's like $1,000 a month, and to feel like they failed even on something like that. Like what does that teach them? Or kind of like you're saying, it's just like, okay, they just accept it, right? Like, I am never going to be healthy. I'm never going to look the way I want to. And then especially not even just the mindset, but then what they put their body through, they're going to be that much more likely to have to try a lot harder. And so, oh man, it's like, it's so messed up. So I'm thinking about like bariatric patients too, because it's like, oh, you're having trouble losing weight. Let's just boop, here you go, have this surgery. But then they don't learn anything. And so it's the same thing with weight loss. It's like, they don't know how to, like you're saying, it's like, they don't know how to maintain, like they're not taught those healthy habits and those skills. So it's like, who is someone to blame? Like, is that an ethical, moral obligation as the provider who's doing these surgeries or who's giving out the medication? Like, where is, not to place blame on someone, but like, what do you
where
do?
Does it go?
Yeah.
Marissa, when you'd reached out, you'd mentioned kind of the psychological aspect of this, and we're talking more physical mechanisms, but the psychological aspect is easily as important, if not more important in this, because the amount of defeat that you're going to feel and the amount of just pure anguish that you're going to go through, like trying these things over and over again and just getting worse every time. It's only a matter of time before we just keep, feeding people these drugs and going to more extremes that eventually I mean, not eventually, it's already happening. I mean, why do we have all this technology and all this knowledge, and yet as a society, we're just getting worse, right?
Yeah.
It's alarming. I mean, and it's in the fitness space too. And you know, Christina, you talked about placing blame, and I used to kind of look at it that way. And I thought, man, you know, these doctors and these other coaches and stuff, it's just, I don't think people know. I just don't think
Yeah.
people have the knowledge. I think it's two things, really. I think one, there's a lack of knowledge. Two, there's money involved. So when there's money involved, whether you're a doctor or you're a coach, someone comes in and they say, hey, I am going to sign up for coaching with you. I want to pay you for 6 months up front. It's going to be several $1,000s, but a coach can be like, yeah, several $1,000s. Cool. In my bank right now. Right. And rather than looking at, all right, well, what's the long-term outlook with this client? Like, where are they at psychologically? Where are they at physically, hormonally, blah, 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 all this stuff. And I don't know how everyone feels about it, but for me, I feel bad if I can't, you know, deliver a certain result to the client. So when they come in, of course, these are the types of things that I'm going to be examining through the consultation, and looking at their history and looking at their lab work and all this stuff. And if we're not doing those things, even if you don't understand these things on a super deep mechanistic level, I don't think you have to just know that you really do know if the person's had a lot of this history of up and down. You probably deep down somewhere, you've got to know that you can't do that to them again and expect the end result to be different.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so.
And I think about people in the medical industry too. You're kind of talking about like the perspective from coaching, but I actually have a friend who we kind of got on a rant with all of this recently on a trip together, and she's just finished her residency for pharmacy. And so I was like, just curious, like, you know, big pharma, what's your take? Right. And so we talked about it, and she's very, very passionate about health and wellness and being that barrier for people to say like, hey, are you exercising? Are you getting sunlight? Are you eating healthy? Like before I give you this drug and all that stuff. And I almost feel like no one goes into I would hope that no one goes into the medical industry thinking like, I'm going to make all this money and screw people over. Like usually we probably go in a little bit more optimistic and with that passion, right? She just finished residency, like 10 years of school. I'm ready to go change lives. And then I feel like what happens is with the medical system, like a lot of what the coaching industry does is point fingers at the medical industry and say, you guys are bad people, right? But it's like, they get in there like rose-colored glasses, and then they're like, awesome. And then they realize all the hoops that they have to jump through. And I don't really know how it works, but like eventually they either get jaded and say, well, this is the system that I'm in, and this is what I'm just going to do my job. Or they get frustrated and quit and come do something like functional health coaching. And so I feel like there's that divide. And so it's hard to blame when it's like I would hope that most came in with the right intentions, but it just doesn't work out that way because of, the money, the loopholes, the everything you have to jump through.
Yeah. And so within my mentorship program, I've had the opportunity to work with some RNs and NPs and even some PhD, even some MDs, and I learned a lot. So I learned a lot about the restrictions and a lot of the things a lot of the limitations that they have. So that gave me a new perspective on that side of things. So they're really set up. I mean, they're set up to fail right from the start. They're set up to fail just for the simple fact that the way that they're taught, for one, because the way the medical system works is it's reactive. It's not proactive, right? It's all reactive, which some of the coaching we do is reactive, of course, but we are trying to be proactive. And when we are reacting to something, we're also trying to think about how that's going to affect them later, which makes us proactive. It's like, I say coaching is like chess, not checkers.
Yeah.
I'm trying to predict 2 or 3 moves ahead as to, okay, if I make this decision now, it's going to probably give them this result, but what's going to happen after that? It's like a great before and after picture is really cool, but what's after the after type of thing?
Yeah.
When I look at some of these, big teams and like these places that are just like pumping out athletes, and then I don't ever see the same athletes pop up again. Or if you go to that athlete's Instagram page 6 months later, you only see pictures from their head up. Why do you think that is? When 6 months before, they, every opportunity they could get, they were scantily clothed and they were showing as much as they could. And now they're not anymore. I'm like, well, because something happened, right? They don't look the same. So it's, there's a lot. There's a lot that goes into it. And unfortunately, we're going to always be fighting an uphill battle. But I do think that I do like to be optimistic in the sense that there are a lot of good people trying to do good things. And we can only really help the people that want to be helped, for one.
Yeah.
There's a population of people that no matter how much you know about psychology and how much you really try to tap into them, you're just not going to get there. Right. Yeah. I always use the example of there's people out there smoking with their oxygen tanks on.
Yeah.
They don't care anymore.
Yeah.
Like there's a point of no return there, most likely. So I get that, but there's still a lot of good things that we can do. It's just that the obstacles we face are financial gain, of course. Like we're all here trying to build a business, we want to make a profit and we want to grow our business. But you can also do that by helping people and making a positive difference. It's very possible to do that, right?
Yeah.
That's an obstacle. Information is an obstacle. There's a lot of information now, but there's a lot of bad information, or there's a lot of information that's not very, it's very markety, it's very like marketing based, and it's very catchy and clickbaity and all of these things. And of course, now the functional health space is getting so big, so a lot of people are jumping in, and everyone's, we've got tons of people that are just what I would call protocol coaches. Like they memorize these protocols that they learn somewhere, but they don't actually know how to coach people. Yeah. And I can teach a protocol to a junior high student if they can memorize it. Right. Yeah. Like protocol is just test taking. Anyone can memorize it. Doesn't mean that they have the experience or know how to actually like coach a human being. Yeah. So that's where we're at.
You made me think of something, and I might be taking this conversation and pivoting it. So I apologize if you want to bring it back in. But I love listening to the Mind Pump guys, and they were talking about obesity as being like a disease. And they were kind of talking about, and it was so interesting the way that they formulated this. It's like, if you had two politicians and you had one person who was like, obesity is not your fault. Right? Like, it's not your fault. It's this disease. Like, it's something that just happens to you. And, here we'll give you all these weight loss drugs and we'll make sure that it's paid for, versus a politician who was like, hey, like, this is something you can control. This is actually kind of your fault. And like, we need to make sure that your lifestyle factors we got to make sure you get some sunshine and some movement. And like, we got to eat better. And it's like, everyone's going to vote for the other guy, right? Like, it's not my fault. Like, I'm just going to take these drugs. And so I think that that's hard too. And like, I feel like that's kind of like where the weight loss drugs kind of come into play. So how, like, what do you, I don't know. It's like, what do we do? Where do we go from here? How do we, because like, there definitely is, like you were saying earlier, like there is definitely a need for some people, and it could tremendously help them in their life. So it's like, how do you blend those two things where it's like restricting access, or like there's like a certain list of qualifications that you have to meet before being assigned? Like, what do we do with this? Or is it just like you're saying, the education piece?
Yeah, I think exactly what you just said. There should be more context. They have to understand how to apply. That's really what it is. They can know what the drug does and know that it's going to work and all this stuff, but if they don't understand what context to apply it to, then of course you're going to run into all these laundry lists of issues that we already mentioned. So unfortunately, they're probably not going to be taught that. So it's something that if you really want to be, if you're in the medical community, most of the good, I don't want to use the word good, but most of the more free thinking MDs that I know, they learn most of that stuff on their own or from other sources outside of their 8 years of school. Right.
Yeah.
So they did the due diligence of doing that. Right. But like you said, a lot of people are going to take the free stuff. They want the free stuff, and nothing's free. So, one thing that I do is, because I get a lot of these cases that I try to understand that people are really frustrated and they're sick of being overweight and they're sick of being sick and they're sick of feeling like crap and all this stuff. So I have to put myself in their shoes. But what I try to do is I try to make people think a little bit more. And so like I will sometimes, when they act out or they present those tendencies, I'll ask them questions because I want them to like repeat back to me, because then they think, oh, okay, so in 5 years from now, I would like to not be overweight. So this is what I need to do now. So if you really have to get people to think and realize what the long-term ramifications are going to be, because if we're operating in this little window, in this little box or time frame, of course it's very easy to just want something now. And of course society is, everything's instantaneous now. I mean, I live in the country and I can get Amazon the same day.
Oh, wow.
I don't even live in the city, and I can order I ordered an iPad and I got it like 4 hours later, and I don't even live in the city.
Wow. I love what you said, though.
And I can't get it in 5 days. What the heck?
Yeah, maybe that's it's more location dependent.
Yeah.
But I love what you said, that it's not about what you say to them, but it's about what they say to you. And that's something that I operate on a lot, because it's like you can tell someone to do something a million times and it's usually going to push them in the other direction. But if you have them reiterate, okay, so how'd that work out for you last time? Okay, so if you do it again, what's going to happen? And then what's going to happen after that? And what's going to happen after that? And then they're like, okay, I get it. I know. I just want the quicker thing. But they kind of talk themselves back down off the ledge. But no, this has been an awesome conversation. I think everything that I would hoped that it would be and more. So I hate to wrap up because I feel like we could actually talk on this for hours and hours more. But Austin, where can people find you, contact you, ask you questions?
Sure. So my social media, I'm Austin Stout on Facebook. I'm Austin ST, the number 8 on Instagram. So both of those, in my bio, there's a link tree. So the link tree will take you to like my YouTube channel, my emails in there. So if you have any inquiries for services, consults, whatever, that's the best way to inquire via email. So everything's kind of in that bio in the link tree.
Perfect. Yeah. And I definitely encourage anybody who maybe has been considering this route or really does struggle with a lot of those deeper functional issues to reach out to Austin. I know you've been really you're very, very helpful just to anyone that reaches out to you, and you pretty much always respond, which was why we got you on this podcast. So thank you so much for your time. And yeah, this is awesome. So Christina, can you outro us out?
Yes. Yeah, guys, so we hope that you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Christina Fit, and Marissa is at Marissa Roy Fitness. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we hope to see you back next week.